Hello once again and welcome to the Gaming News Canada show. I am your host, Steve McAllister. Given the busy fall sports season is just around the corner, including the start of the NFL regular season this week, our guest on this episode of the podcast had us thinking about athletes, coaches, and organizations whose ability to get out in front of a situation often leads to success. And that brings us to Segev LLP, which last month announced the opening of its Alberta office ahead of the anticipated arrival of regulated online gaming and sports betting in the Western Canada province. To talk more about the latest expansion for the law firm and some other matters about the regulated gambling industry, we welcome aboard the founding partner of Segev LLP, Ron Segev. Hey, Ron, thanks so much for joining us. And I think, as hard as this is to believe, I think this might be your maiden appearance on the podcast.
Yeah, my official maiden appearance, because you and I have spoken countless times. But thanks for having me, and it's always great to see you, Steve.
Yeah, and it was obviously the announcement last month was kind of an excuse for both of us, I think, to kind of double back to each other. And we bumped into each other briefly at the Canadian Gaming Summit back in June. But it's an oversight on my part to not get you on the pod sooner. But before we get in the nitty gritty, how's your summer been?
Yeah, it's been good. I think I mentioned to you that it's been shorter than I'd like. We've had I'm based out west, and we had a really short season. We had January, and then this is the first year that I heard someone use the expression Julember. So we had January and Julember. August was 2 weeks of summer, and now it's like it's back to sweaters and jeans and jumpers and the rest of it. But short and sweet, and already got eyes set on ski season, I guess.
That's definitely something to look forward to. I guess the other thing too, Ron, when you talk about the summer, it's funny as we cut back to the podcast doing it once a week for the summer, and it seems every time we get a guest on, we talk about what a crazy busy summer it's been, and as much as it feels like it's a little bit like the sports calendar, and just putting on my old sports media hat. When I got into this career 40 years ago, there were certain quiet spots on the sports calendar. And of course, fast forward to 2024, that's no longer the case with free agency and all the other stuff that happens in sports. And it feels like it's the same thing with the gaming industry. That doesn't, I think a lot of people, when you talk to them in May and June, the people that attend the SBC Summit in Secaucus and the Canadian Gaming Summit, that's kind of the end of a calendar. But that certainly hasn't been the case this summer, and I'm thinking for you and your brother Alon, that's probably been the case for a while, where it's just you're on the wheel all the time.
Oh yeah, that's totally right. Yeah, I mean we try to use the CGS as sort of the closing event for the for the conference here, so to speak. We try to take summer to recharge and then to do some planning in anticipation of the year moving forward. And obviously take care of admin, have some fun with our legal team. We're up to a team of about 55 now. And so we fly people in, we do our summer party, we get to know each other, and we do some planning in terms of, what do we want to achieve going forward for the next, let's call it business year, if not calendar or fiscal year. And which is why we put the press release out when we put the press release out, because we managed to go head down, do our deal with the lawyer in Calgary that we just hired, and secure office space, and get a move on with all the supporting marketing material, what have you.
Hey, Ron, before we get into Alberta, I think we might have had a conversation at G2E back two years ago, but just for our audience, how did the firm get into the game? Where did your gaming practice start? And what's been the evolution of that practice for you and Alon and the rest of the people at the firm?
I'm sorry to say I have a really boring origin story. And usually when I speak to young lawyers who are looking to get into the space, or law students who are looking to join the firm, and they'll look at my LinkedIn, or they'll look at my website, and they'll see that, here's a lawyer who's stuck behind his desk. He's in Vegas, he's in London, he's in Malta. This is great. How did you get into it? How did you get into space? The story is I answered a help wanted ad, and that's it. I was in private practice for a few years. I felt like I wanted to get closer to the business side. I was looking for an in-house position. There was a large Swedish company setting up an office in North America. They happened to choose Canada, and I applied blindly. I had no idea about poker or casino or anything. Never played. I was such a bad poker player that I won my first 3 or 4 hands handsomely because no one had a clue as to what I was doing. And I just fell in love with the space, fell in love with the people. When that came to its logical end, I decided to create a law firm that was purpose built for the gaming and betting community. And I wanted to bring an attitude that a general counsel would bring to the table. So, very much, a business participant, a stakeholder, someone who, if desired, can sit, elbow to elbow with the board, with management, understands how the business works. And from those early days, 13 years ago, we've grown considerably, and now we do. I like to say I'll do anything within rhyme and reason, and so not just gaming compliance and regulatory, but we'll do private and public corporate finance. We'll do M&A work. We'll do a bunch of commercial work. We do trademark work. Anything our clients need, we try to figure out how to do. And then we've grown since to touch all the adjacent industries, so payments, blockchain, crypto, digital marketing, influencer agreements, rights holder agreements, you name it, and still growing. If our clients are growing, we're growing.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that's the one thing that's been exciting for this industry in the time I've been involved. Ron, is much shorter period of time than you, but that this is still a very young industry, especially in terms of regulation in both Canada and the United States. And I think we're not even. I don't even know if we're through the first inning yet of where this industry is going.
Well, I totally agree. If you look at iGaming in the U.S. alone, I think it's only open in 6 states, and everyone knows that that's where the gravy is. That's where the margins are. That's where the player spend is. That's where the player values are. So sports has been a dominant part of the U.S. conversation, but we haven't seen iGaming roll out to full effect yet. Look at Ontario as an analogy and see the percentage of iGaming revenue over sports revenue. Proof is in the pudding. My thesis on this is that if/when certain states in the United States start regulating sweeps casinos, I think they're going to get a taste for that sweet casino revenue, and they'll see that the sky didn't turn red. The world didn't come to an end by virtue of having regulated a casino offering. Let's capture more of this tax revenue, and hopefully we'll see a rollout.
Hey Ron, on the Alberta announcement, there's a few I guess a few layers of the onion I'd like to unroll with you here. And obviously the first one is just a decision. We know Alberta was obviously a hot topic at the Canadian Gaming Summit. I think probably the biggest buzz of the 3 days was Minister Dale Nally's speech on the Thursday morning, I guess, at the conference, conference room. Yeah. Doug Downey, the Attorney General of Ontario, was there as well, and I think we all knew what was coming. But Nally's speech basically was, it's not a matter of if, it's when regulated gambling is coming to Alberta. I don't know what intelligence you have. There doesn't seem to be a firm date, and back in June there was a lot of speculation of maybe November around the Grey Cup, and of course everybody points towards the Super Bowl, and I don't know if you can shine a light on that. But just in terms of how long had the wheels been in motion for Segev to go down the road and basically plant some stakes physically in Alberta?
We knew that's where we wanted to be, probably well before the summer. I should say there's 2 reasons why we took an interest in better serving our clients on the ground in Alberta. So one is the gaming and betting piece, and related to that also is some of the land-based work that we did in that province over the last 12 to 18 months. So we already had good relationships with certain people at the AGLC. It made a lot of sense for us to be more firmly planted there. let's say 3 reasons. The other reason is we're doing increasingly a lot more work with First Nations out west, certainly with First Nations who are interested in gaming and betting opportunities in British Columbia. We know that there are quite a few First Nations in Alberta that are interested in opportunities, and we think we can serve their interests well. But then the other piece that really drove the decision was the public corporate finance piece. So, we have a strong securities practice here, and quite simply, my partner who runs the securities practice said, "Hey, our clients want to start running deals through Alberta. The regulatory environment there and the business environment there presents a little less friction than it does in Ontario or BC. They see it as an opportunity. How can we support them there?" So all those things sort of coalesced into a logical decision for us to, okay, let's go and do it.
Hey, Ronnie, the First Nations piece is a really important part of the market, and maybe it will be a bit of a differentiator from what we've seen in Ontario so far. Again, for our listeners, can you maybe just talk a little bit more about the role of First Nations in the current legal gambling market in Alberta? And again, I wonder what the possibilities are in terms of First Nations and operators working together in a new regulated environment.
Yeah, I think that's a sticky question generally, and the reason that is because we don't have a lot of visibility on it in terms of the opportunities for them to work together. Currently, some First Nations are active in market on the land-based side. I could tell you that there are certain First Nations in Alberta that are interested in getting involved on the land-based side. I think once you're in land-based, you're exposed to the industry, and it's sort of a natural transition to start thinking about your online presence. Traditionally, the First Nations in Canada have been, cut out of the opportunity. If you're going to compare it to the way the system works in the United States with state compacts and tribal casino down there, we have nothing like that up in Canada. There are some partnership agreements in place between the province of Ontario and First Nations of Ontario, and a similar arrangement in BC between British Columbia and the First Nations of BC that have to do with a share of gross gaming revenue collected by the provincial lotteries, and a share of that is allocated to First Nations. But from the First Nations perspective, this is an economic self-determination issue. This is a jobs piece. This is a local economy piece. It's sort of the overused analogy of, give a man a fish, teach a man to fish, right? And so I think they just want to exercise more economic self-determination. They're certainly very successful in other areas of business, and no reason they shouldn't be successful in this area, as many of them already are. So I know that the province of Alberta has already commenced some discussions with First Nations there to see about working on potential opportunities. To be perfectly frank, I don't have visibility on that. We have a circle of friends who regularly provide us some intelligence on what's happening, and similarly, nothing's come in from them. But it's no surprise to people who followed some of the stuff I've written. I wrote a piece back in 2017 arguing for an overhaul of the Canadian system, and having a look at what's going on in the United States, and seeing a lot of the economic development that it's created for tribes in the United States. And I would love to see our provincial governments have a fresh look at this and see how they can allow First Nations access those opportunities.
I guess the other question I had for you too is you do hear some people say that why doesn't Alberta just take the Ontario market and just move it over? Is it that simple? Is it that black and white?
I don't think so. I think people in Alberta are different than people in Ontario. I think they're probably going to have different ways of gambling, different sports that they want to gamble on. There might be different RG issues at play. There might be different sensitivities around, around organized crime or what have you. So I think you definitely need that local piece. The other thing I'll say is that Alberta may disagree with some of the sort of policy-driven directions that Ontario's taken, in particular with regards to marketing and advertising. Alberta may think that, the public interest is still protected, even if we allow certain things to happen in Alberta that aren't happening in Ontario. They may be right for taking that decision. I think it's case by case. You have to understand your constituents. You have to understand what their what the risk points are, and in that way you build policy around it. So not necessarily cookie cutter. That said, I think a lot of the infrastructure that was created by Ontario can be leveraged by Alberta fairly wholesale, right? But I think, again, the stuff that's more policy driven, RG, protection of the public interest, protection of minors, allowing local stakeholders to participate perhaps in ways that they're not participating in Ontario, that might be the fine tuning that would be needed to localize the offering.
I'd also suggest, Ron, that it's a good situation for Alberta where you can take some lessons learned. And I think if you talk to people at IGO and AGCO, they'll tell you they've learned some lessons. And I think the sports betting advertising is one of those where I don't think anybody anticipated the market exploding right out of the gate, and all of a sudden people feeling like they're being hit over the head with sports betting and gaming advertising. And I'm sure Martha Otten and Mitch Davidson and the folks at AGCO and IGO, there were lessons they learned from looking at other jurisdictions when they launched the Ontario market 2 years ago.
No question. They did the heavy lifting, and Alberta knows that. I mean, Minister Nally had acknowledged that they were first to market. They did a great job, and there's a lot to learn from them. There's a reason that he's in conversations with Minister Downey. Yeah, I mean, you raise an interesting point. The floodgates opened to such a degree that was perhaps unexpected. I suspect it's going to be crazier in Alberta, and so if they want to play it safe, then yeah, why not go to market with all of those policy directives that Ontario's adopted. And then if you feel like you can, toggle it back a little bit, then do it then. Yeah, I hate to use the word cowboy when describing Albertans, but there might be more of a cowboy attitude there with respect to some of their punters.
And I do wonder too if we have seen the amount of advertising die down, and I think there is room. And this is an industry that prides itself on innovation and creativity, and I think that's one area where we probably haven't seen as much as I thought we would. Is on the marketing side, and maybe in Alberta, that will be an approach where maybe operators don't spend a ton of money on media buys, and that there is an opportunity to do something that's a little bit more creative and innovative.
Yeah, I agree. We've got plenty of national chains in Canada with very valuable databases that are non-endemic to the space. And I'm shocked that we haven't seen these partnership tie-ups that we're seeing in the United States, right? Where, almost out of the gate when sports betting opened up in the US, we saw deals with, Topgolf and ESPN and Sports Illustrated. And, we have those Canadian analogies here, but I don't know that I've seen them leveraged to the same degree. That's one idea. The other thing is, Ontario, in my opinion, hasn't fully embraced the opportunities that could result from a relationship with affiliates, and in particular, affiliates, as aren't allowed to advertise any incentives or any promotional offers on their sites. That can only be advertised by the operators themselves. So imagine a situation where someone's online looking for a bonus offer or a bonus deposit match. Odds are that a gray hat affiliate is going to outrank them on SEO than an operator would, and that's what they're going to see, right? And if that's the case, there's a likelihood that they're going to be clicked out to an offshore operator, right? If that's the case, there's a likelihood that they won't be presented with RG material or material on how to play responsibly, or presented with resources in case you have an RG issue. I think Alberta has an opportunity to rethink the relationship with affiliates, to create a registration class for affiliates, to allow affiliates to engage in that incentivized marketing, to attract all of the paid and organic traffic that I imagine the offshore affiliates are taking instead, to drive more traffic to Alberta, to educate the market more properly. And that's a low-hanging fruit play in my mind. We're not creating new technology. We're just inviting them to the table.
And is that a case, Ron, where you do put some rails around the types of bonuses and incentives that can be offered? I mean, we saw some of the bonuses in some of the U.S. states were a little bit on the crazy side, but I guess there are rules that can be put into effect in Alberta.
Yeah, I think that's critical. This conversation is really timely because we saw a class action suit against DraftKings just drop, I think, a week ago, where the terms of their bonuses were allegedly misleading and very difficult to enjoy, so to speak. So, if you wanted to make full use of the bonus, you had to lose a lot of money. And yeah, that was in the fine print, but perhaps the print was too fine. That's the allegation. And so, again, Alberta would do well to, either do the research themselves or surround themselves with people who understand that component of the industry. And yeah, will allow you to engage in incentivized marketing, but it has to be done, plainly, clearly, in bold print. You have to advise the market as to potential risks, et cetera, et cetera. I think there is a way to do this in a responsible manner.
Hey, Ron, just, you and, anytime you go to a conference, you and your brother Alana are, I think, are always doing some kind of panel or moderating an event or doing a one-on-one interview with somebody in a conference room. And I just wonder, do you find that part of your role and the work that you've done in the gaming industry, that both you and Alana have become advocates for the regulated industry as well?
Yeah, I guess that's true. Look, we I came up in this space. I've been in this space since 2006, back when it was, at in tiny little conference rooms full of, people who are my vintage might smile at this reference. Full of Breitlings and Ed Hardy hoodies, like a lot of new money, a lot of either risk tolerant or risk ignorant money. And the industry's matured since then. We've brought in a lot of professional management and adult supervision, I like to say. And yes, this is an industry that needs to be closely regulated. Yes, there is a lot of public harm that can result in connection with gaming and betting, no question. Yes, people suffer from a disease related to this product, no question. There's no sugarcoating it. But it can be managed responsibly. It is a product that has been in demand for, since Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. They were probably throwing dice, honestly. It's going to happen. If you don't regulate it, it's going to happen outside of your field of view. And I think that's even more dangerous. That aside, look, it creates great jobs. It's an e-commerce product. It's a technology business. And on the sports betting side, it does create another level of fandom, of fan engagement. It supports local teams. It supports the businesses that support the local teams. It fills the pubs and the restaurants. And it just creates an overall stickier product and more engaged community. So there are some benefits there too. Are we advocates for the business? Yeah, absolutely. Are we, do we try to be responsible advocates for the business? Absolutely. At the end of the day, we're a law firm. We try to keep our clients out of trouble. We try to make sure that they're compliant. We always recommend that they get regulated. And once those are handled, we try to help them make some money. But look, we also don't forget that that the industry has supported us, and it is reciprocal, right?
The industry has brought in hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue since its inception in April 2022, and I think the government's in Ontario is really short on a story around that money. You responsible gambling, and we know their addictions, and I think there's a real opportunity for the Alberta government to, when those tax dollars do start rolling in, to steer that towards problem gambling program, addiction program. I think that would help the government with the case they're going down a regulated path.
Yeah, I agree with you. Look, if you want to have a sustainable industry, it can't be run in a manner that harms its customer base, right? In an unsustainable manner, right? Now, every harm is a harm. And so I'm not saying that there's a correct threshold number that are okay to be harmed. I think the number is zero. Zero people should be harmed. But if the province or any state or province or regulatory regime is interested in having a sustainable industry, RG is critically important. An industry cannot be sustained if its customers are harmed. So I agree with you. There needs to be an allocation of some of that revenue.
Hey, Ron, just one more question on Alberta. You talked earlier about you think it'll be a very robust market. I mean, we have 50 operators in Ontario right now. Could you foresee that many operators in Alberta?
That's a really interesting question. Most people ask me about the potential size of the market. And we've seen some numbers thrown around, like, at maturity, 700 million, at maturity, 900 million. If it's greater than that, it wouldn't surprise me. Is it a market that can support 50 operators? I don't think so, just by virtue of the size. But I think it also really depends on what the state of the current market looks like. And here's what I mean by it. There are certain operators that had a head start in Ontario for various reasons. If the state of the current market is such that there are certain operators that have a sizable head start in Ontario, I think there's going to be less room for smaller operators to enter. Okay, in a sort of cost effective or economically feasible manner, right? But if Alberta creates a situation where it's a greenfields opportunity, so to speak, then we might see a large number rush to the market, right, to try to grab that market share. I don't know how it's going to play out. Now, I'm assuming it's probably going to be similar to Ontario, in which case probably less than 50, I suspect. Now, as I said, local population, local habits. If the average number of counts an Albertan holds is twice what an Ontarian holds for whatever reason, all right, with that we've got a different market, right?
Right.
If an Albertan, for whatever reason, likes to play casino on one platform and likes to bet on hockey on another and likes to play DFS on the third, we have a different market, right? So we have to see really what's going on there. But my suspicions is that smaller market, probably fewer operators.
Hey, Ron, you mentioned daily fantasy, and I wasn't going to ask you that question because we're running out of time, but I'll ask you quickly. You've been following the Ontario Superior Court case brought forward by the Attorney General of Ontario around liquidity, and I'm just wondering, like, how do you view that case? What are you particularly interested in? And again, I think if you talk to people who play online gaming or daily fantasy sports nuts, and there are many of them, I think, liquidity is a no-brainer, but obviously this is a much more complex issue than people wanting to play fantasy sports across borders.
Yeah, it's clearly complex enough to have a reference case around it. So yeah, first, it's as you know, it's not just about DFS. There's progressive slots,
Right.
there's poker, there's peer-to-peer wagering. Any game where more people means a better game is going to be sensitive to liquidity issues. What are my thoughts on it? Look, as an economic question, I think liquidity is critical for further growth and for sustainable health of the Ontario market. So take, for example, a DFS maniac who is just tired of the liquidity constraints with an Ontario registered operator. There's a small chance that they might go offshore, right? And certainly we don't want that to happen. Now, the legal question, does Ontario have the right to do this? I'll leave that for the court to decide. Thankfully, I'm not behind the bench on that one. I think the liquidity is interesting in terms of Alberta opening up too. I think there is precedent and there is an opportunity for shared liquidity between the provinces, and hopefully that'll come out. I think it'll improve the player experience for residents of both provinces. If I had to flip a coin on this thing, I think that the court is going to find a way to rule in favor of Ontario. And how they're going to do that, I don't know. But obviously we're keeping an eye on it.
Hey, last question, Ron. You're doing this interview for Vancouver. We know that BC has a really robust gaming industry. I mean, in terms of suppliers and gaming companies, and I think what are we now? Probably 18 months since the One Comply acquisition by GeoComply. Strive Gaming, I believe, has roots in British Columbia. Everybody always asks, like, what, Ontario came first, Alberta's going to be next, who comes after that? Are you bullish on a regulated jurisdiction landing in BC at some point?
Well, first, I'd like to say that BC came first in a few ways. So first, if you look at the early days of the online industry, and you looked at companies like StarNet and Bodog, Cake, Juicy Steaks, they all had a touch point here. I won't get into further detail. But I think that's important because basically what it did is it created a very large class of professionals who understood the space, who were internationally connected and understood how to build and run these companies. The other thing I'd like to point out is that BC went online first back in 2004. And that playnow.com is largely considered an okay platform, which some would consider high praise for a Crown Corp run platform. It makes money, it's profitable, it funds our schools and hospitals, and it's been doing so since 2004. It also runs the platform for Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
Right.
And they went live before Quebec did and before Ontario did. Now, Ontario did adopt this new iGaming regime before any other province. And so hats off to them for that, and fully acknowledge the heavy lift that was. Do I think BC is going to follow suit? Probably not in the short term. Just speaking with some people I know at BCLC, I just don't see it. BC is a very different market. I think one of the reasons Ontario went the path that they did was because Play OLG didn't perform as expected. I think there's some frustration that the offshore casinos, the gray market was very much alive and well. PlayNow.com, I don't know what the numbers are. I'd be surprised if they dominate the market here, but they are a major market force here. So I don't know that there's that much pressure to, throw the baby out with the bathwater and just redo this whole thing. There's also a critical jobs piece at play. PlayNow.com has a very important office in a smaller city in the interior of British Columbia. It's not to say that those jobs would be lost, but there's probably some concern that they'd be at risk. And I'll also say that we've just come out of several years ago, a really difficult money laundering investigation. Our land-based casinos were caught up in some irresponsible activity, if I could put it that way. And we've seen an overhaul of it. There's been a proposed overhaul of our gaming regulatory regime so that GPEB is going to report to an independent office. That hasn't fully rolled out yet. So I think it's going to be slower out here. If you asked me for a timeline, I'd be surprised if we saw any movement in at least 3 to 5 years. I think it's going to be business as usual here.
Thanks for that, Ron, and thanks for the history lesson on BC as well. Ron Segev is the founding partner of Segev LLP. Great follow on LinkedIn, and you'll also go to the Segev LLP website. They do a great job staying on top of what's going on in the industry. Ron, we could talk for probably 2 hours easily about the industry and your experiences. So we're not going to wait another 3.5 years to get you back on the podcast at some point. But really appreciate your time. Look forward to our paths crossing in person at some point this fall. And yes, thanks again for joining us. And best of luck with the new office in Alberta. Thanks,
Steve. I appreciate it.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. As always, you can find us on Substack at gamingnewscanada.ca and also on the various podcast platforms. We thank Ron Segev for joining us today, and we will see everybody again very soon.
Thank you for listening to the Gaming News Canada show. Sign up for our newsletter at gamingnewscanada.ca. Follow Steve McAllister on LinkedIn. Message Steve if you're interested in being a sponsor or featured guest.